Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I want to bring you a talk type of video. It doesn't really pertain to Goosebumps all the way, but it's just a broad topic I want to discuss, at least vent about in my frustrations, because I don't know if I'm the only person that thinks this, but I've been really upset about this because I've been in such a kids' horror movie kick. And the topic is, what's happened to kids' horror movies over the past 10 years? And now I bring this topic up because, in a lot of ways, every kids' horror movie, at least live action, I'm not talking about animated films per se in this video, but you can also pertain it to that. They all feel strangely like each other. And now, I'm not saying that films aren't derivative of themselves and don't borrow from other films. If I'm being honest, a lot of my favorite films out there are derivative. But the problem I'm seeing is that in the past 10 years, kids' horror has become more fantasy, family, adventure stuff, which is fine. I mean, that genre was big in the early 90s. There's films like The Page Master, which is a blend of live action and animated. Prime example of that in the early 90s. Hocus Pocus, another example of that. There's room for it. But it's almost strictly, exclusively that stuff these days. Now, what I'm getting at is there's no more films like those late golden / early to late silver age kids horror movies we got in the 90s and early 2000s. Granted, a lot of them were straight to video or they were put onto cable via like a Disney Channel original movie or a Nickelodeon original movie. Those still had more flair to an average Are You Afraid of the Dark or Goosebumps tale. The movies we're getting now, like Goosebumps 2015 and all the ripoffs that have come after this, literally feel like the same movie. And I'm just getting so fed up with it, man. Now, y'all might be asking, yo, completionist, you got a Goosebumps 2 poster on your wall. You can't be that mad at the films these days. Well, in my head, there's about 10 to 11 movies I consider in this genre outright that have come out in the past decade or so that I've watched and made note of. I have a couple on physical. I also have a couple in the mail because I just want to have these in my collection. And what sparked me to want to make this was recently watching R.L. Stine's Zombie Town, right? And I'll say this up front. I've said it in the past, I think Goosebumps 2015, in a lot of ways, kind of ruined Goosebumps in some aspects, and also ruined kids' horror movies. And I'll get into the Goosebumps aspects for just a sec. The reason why I think it's ruined it is because Sony is the one making the films and the TV show, and they're going with this whole approach where they're getting farther away from the source material, which I think is a drastic mistake to be doing so, but they've just shown consistently that they've doubled down. The only reason why I like Goosebumps 2 Haunted Halloween so much is because in the veins of the story, it feels like a Goosebumps book. Whether it's good or not, I can praise the sequel movie more than the more popular Jumanji ripoff that is 2015's Goosebumps. Now, I find it fitting that this little DVD here that I picked up out of a $5 bin at Walmart has Zathura and Jumanji on it. Because I'll be damned, man. These three movies are basically the same thing. Same plot, same premise, you name it. It's this. Just Goosebumps, the movie itself, just has the theme of Goosebumps to separate it. As in Zathura and Jumanji were actually original content. So I can praise those two more than I can praise 2015. You know, when I think back on these movies that have come out in the past decade, right? There's like three categories. You have your Goosebumps films and its ripoffs. You have what Disney's doing, which is legacy, reboot, remakes, and they're all a bunch of crap. Minus one film, which I'll get into. And then you have your low-budget, cheesy stuff that might not be great at all or even technically good, but I can still praise them more than the other two categories. So, let's get into Goosebumps real quick. I pulled this out. I only have 3 examples to share for this video. But Goosebumps 2015, right? You had this Jumanji style, set on a specific day. Monsters come to life. You got to defeat the monsters. That's the idea of the story. Haunted Halloween is no different. It just takes place on Haunted Halloween. Netflix put out a movie called The Curse of Bridge Hollow, which caught my eye a few months ago. And I watched it, and it quite literally is just Goosebumps 2 Haunted Halloween. It's legit almost the same premise. Set on Halloween, an item makes animatronics come to life and monsters, and the town has to defeat the monsters. I'm not kidding. It's the same movie. And these are the type of films that companies are rolling with, right? And if it's not those, you have Disney putting out Hocus Pocus 2, which honestly is one of the worst legacy sequels I have ever seen. It just doesn't capture the charm and the originality and just the spirit of that original movie from 1992 or 1993. It feels a hollowed out, modernized version of the tale in all the cringiest ways possible. And I can also attribute this to a Disney Channel original movie, actually the first one ever made in 1997, called Under Wraps. It had rights issues for many years because Disney and Hallmark, I think, co-owned the rights, and then Hallmark had the distribution of it, and kind of got messy. So Disney reacquired the complete rights for it and remade the movie sometime in 2020, 2021, and then put out a sequel to it. And they both are not good. They're actually rather cringe. And I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, when did movies get this soulless? Like, when did it all go wrong, right? And for Disney's case, I would say it's just that they're putting out stuff to make money, and the people up in their corporate don't really know what their audience wants. However, I will swallow my words on this one movie, the Haunted Mansion remake movie, or you even want to call it that replaces the Eddie Murphy film from 2003. I think I prefer the newer version over the Eddie Murphy one, which is a good thing. I think it's way spookier and scarier, and probably is one of the better films to come out in the past 10 years in the subgenre. But back to Goosebumps, I feel like the Goosebumps clones are all just doing the same Jumanji-like setup, and there's more to kids' horror than that. Which brings me to films like R.L. Stine's Zombie Town. And I made a review, and I said that this movie is just more fine to meh. But still, I would rather see films like this get made over a standalone book or an idea of a story that's self-contained, that's trying not necessarily to be a Jumanji ripoff, even though it does kind of have that flair in it in this film, I would say. It's not obvious, you know what I mean? And I can appreciate when the studios are putting out this for kids and family entertainment horror. But the problem is with this is that in order to do stories like this justice, a PG-13 rating is kind of needed, and you need to go a little darker instead of the humor. And I feel like the comedy and making the villains not really threats and just making the vibe of the film silly gets in the way of these modern kids' horror movies. Another example I can share, one with a great premise, but clouded by budget and cringe, is Ghost Squad. I haven't made a review of this film. This came out in 2015, right around the time of Goosebumps 2015. And this feels like a generic house story where kids lock themselves in a haunted house. It kind of feels like a Goosebumps book, but it gets really dull and weird, and the acting is bad, right? So if it's not the premise being dumb or goofy or whatever, it's just the acting's terrible or the budget is awful. And these are the type of stories I think most of us want. We want original movies like this, but with bigger budgets. So that brings me to like films that have come out also recently I don't have, but I do have in the mail coming, like Lost Creek from 2018, and Spirit Halloween, the movie from 2022, they look better in comparison to something like The Curse of Bridge Hollow, which is just trying to be Goosebumps 2 Haunted Halloween, or even Goosebumps 2015 for the matter for me. Because at least they're telling a self-contained story in the vein and in the spirit of storytelling, like Are You Afraid of the Dark and Goosebumps did back in the 90s. And I'm just perplexed as to why these kind of movies, they get slammed harder than movies like this, right? When you play the safe route, I get it. You know, we can bring this to a discussion, right? Goosebumps, 2015, Jumanji's, they're tried and true formulas. They're guaranteed moneymakers. Studios, of course, are going to try the guaranteed thing, then take a swing on an original concept. I get that. But there's so much untapped potential out there in the market. So many stories, books that I think could transcend into a movie form that nobody is touching. Goosebumps, the books themselves are pretty much the biggest example of that. Like the big pillar cornerstone Goosebumps books from the classic era have not been touched in film. And if they have, they've been made into scene filler in this movie to front the main character of Goosebumps, according to Sony, Slappy. And all these other villains don't matter. It's just the Slappy show. At least we have Slappy to kind of latch on to with Sony, but even then, that wears thin very quickly. And it makes me disappointed. You know, as an enthusiast of this subgenre, as somebody who's going through their entire collection right now, reorganizing it, trying to do a new collection show off, I'm thinking about like the movies and how this media reaches the mainstream audience. And I just feel like there's a disconnect from the stuff that we all come to, and especially in the books and the tried, like the real source of kids horror comes from these books. And none of that is being translated great with any sort of backable budget or any sort of mainstream company putting any justice into the horror side of things into films for these kind of stories. They're just doing just the same old crap. And it just gets to me. It gets to me on a personal level. To be honest, I said in my review of Zombie Town, I would love to see more standalone R.L. Stine novellas and books get turned into films. I'd rather see that than future seasons of a 2023 Goosebumps show at this point. I'd rather see that than a third Goosebumps movie with a similar plot like the first two movies. I'd rather see those. And I think that speaks volumes. I stress this because I think we're at the point where there could be change coming forward. Who knows what we can get in the future, but I think that maybe what film companies can start doing to kind of remedy this issue is just try to make PG-13 horror movies with like 12 to 13-year-old protagonists. Make it kind of dark, kind of gritty, edgy, in the spirit of a Goosebumps book or Are You Afraid of the Dark Tale? And I think it would be really popular. I think majority of us Goosebumps fans, if we got a big enough word of mouth for it, would go tune in. One of the best examples of this type of movie that has come out, you know, since the Silver Age ended in 2002 of the kids' horror boom, was actually movies like Monster House, which was an animated film from 2006, but that movie feels a lot in the veins of what Are You Afraid of the Dark and Goosebumps was. The Haunting Hour TV show had a spin-off movie written by Dan Angel and Billy Brown that was basically that. Not saying that it was good, but they were trying that stuff in the late 2000s still. And, you know, I don't blame them for putting out stuff like that and it not succeeding all that well or getting good critic appraisal, because even then, if it wasn't big budget animated movies, they were getting low budget live actions. And it's just, still, I would rather see movies like Don't Think About It, which was kind of a cringy Haunting Hour film, over Goosebumps 2015. I would still take that. You know, I don't really know where else I can go with this topic other than just to say it like this. If writers had the heart and soul that they claim to have when they attach themselves to IPs like Goosebumps or Are You Afraid of the Dark, which I actually can commend Are You Afraid of the Dark these days because they're putting out more anthology standalone content for its audience than Goosebumps is for new content. And I don't really blame Goosebumps all that much because Stein is a one-man band. He is still solely writing the books. They're only putting 2 out a year. They're trying to capitalize on more reprints and putting out a graphics of The Haunted Mask because The Haunted Mask is a cult favorite. They're trying to still produce new content without having to solely rely on Stein putting out brand new books. And it's a give and take with that. But I just wish that these franchises or these bigger ones would get bigger budget movies that feel like their source material, or we get new movies in the vein of something like a Goosebumps or Are You Afraid of the Dark with big budgets. You know, I feel like the subgenre, the family horror, the kids horror subgenre has just gotten stale. And everything that comes out or has come out, minus, like I said, there are a handful of movies that I'll go back to. Like Lost Creek, I don't have a physical copy, but if you had not seen Lost Creek, I would probably say that's the best kids horror movie I've seen in the past 10 years. Go check that out. I watched Spirit Halloween, the movie. I've watched Zombie Town, R.L. Stein's Zombie Town, I should say. They're not great or a good movie by any means, but still in the same fashion as that. I would definitely recommend Ghost Squad, even though it's not a great movie by any means, but it still feels like that too. And even Goosebumps 2, Haunted Halloween, I would recommend for that. To an extent. You're not going to really get the full extent of it because it still has Jumanji in its veins, but you still get that, it feels like a Goosebumps book vibe. So it's not all a wash. Even the Haunted Mansion Disney movie that came out recently was rather good for the traditional family horror movie. So that's not a complete waste of time. But the rest, I'm just not interested in, man. You know, Hollywood, streaming services, companies out there, please just start trying to make something worth it. You know what I mean? Like, I get making profits and not upsetting too many people seems like the easy route to go. But if you make solid PG-13 movies with some solid horror that does not go too far, the language doesn't go too far, and you put some effort into the writing, I think you'll still win over audiences that way. You playing it safe and going the whole Jumanji route, Sony, is just getting old, and everybody trying to copy it is just depressing, right? And it's a sad time when you're so deprived of family spooky entertainment, or at least good quality ones, that when movies like Hubie Halloween, which is a Adam Sandler straight to Netflix movie released in the past 10 years, is objectively a bad film, looks good and fun in comparison to all the things that come out around it in the similar genre. And that's the world we live in for kids' horror films these days. It's sad, and I just want better. And I don't know if I'm the only one that thinks like this, and if you share my sentiment, let me know down in the comment section. Do you agree with some points I made? Do you think that the kids' horror genre in film could be better? What would you recommend? What kind of stuff you want to see? Do you want to see PG-13, darker kids' horror stories that don't go too far? Or do you want to see big franchises like Goosebumps take some books and make films out of them? I'm dying to know, because I think this topic is, has a lot of room and a lot of discussion to be had if we want to carry it on. But until next time, take care.